This week was the last of our deadline weeks to get House bills off the floor, and so next week we start the process of committee work. We'll have not be in 12 hours every day, but we'll be pushing pretty hard. Now we race to sine die. I haven't heard how the House is doing today or where they are, so I don't know how they're doing with our bills. That's pretty much what we did. We did stay late last night to almost 12. I know a couple of you all were there, and good for you. We appreciate it. So with that, let's just open it up for questions. I know you all have had a busy week too.
We did this in 35 minutes.
Well, I'd love for all of you to talk about your thoughts on redistricting and the maps that came out, and just generally those follow-up questions too.
Sure. I'll start off with just a general overview. The process has been long. There's been a lot of work, and I am very grateful to my committee members that were on that committee, my caucus members that were on the committee, Senator Kirt, Julia Kirt, Senator Michael Brooks, and Senator Kevin Matthews. They have worked so very, very hard on a process that I don't think any of us who've not been through it before realized was going to be just so complex and so difficult. So I've been very grateful for that. They've been very good about getting us information to our caucus as a whole and helping us track the process. As far as the maps that have come out that were released a couple of days ago, it's, as you can imagine, a lot to digest. And in deadline week, when you were in from about 9 till 12 last night, I have not had a chance to look at them in depth, so I couldn't give you an answer on statewide what I think. I know my district looks quite a bit different, and I'm going to have to get used to that idea. And I think everybody else feels exactly the same way. The most nonpartisan part of this process has been how all of our members seem to be dealing with a lot of emotions about losing part of our districts. But believe it or not, we actually do become emotionally attached to the people in our districts and special areas in our districts. So we're gonna be dealing with that, but I'll be happy as soon as I have the weekend to look at the statewide maps. I'd like to do the overlap of the House maps and see, but I'd like to turn it over to Julia and to Michael to give you all some details on how things have gone and how we got where we are right now.
Okay. Oh, great. Can you get it? I can. Great. No worries. Well, and so this has been an interesting experience, especially with term limits, because there's not much institutional knowledge or memory of this process. And so everybody that's going through it, for the most part, we're going through it for the very first time. And so I think in the beginning we were all able to acknowledge that this is somewhat of an imperfect and awkward process, having the legislators basically draw their own district lines. And then again, I think that members obviously, between knocking doors, campaigning, and outreach to constituents, that they become very, very attached to different communities, different constituents, and by necessity, those things have to change. And so I think that the process has been, I think, collegial. I think it's been cordial, and I think it's been cooperative. Again, not perfect, but at the same time, I feel like that we were involved, and that input that we provided made a difference.
Well, I just want to add, one of the interesting things was in giving input, thinking through our communities and what was important in our communities, and I think that was a challenge for all of us, even if we know the communities we represent really well. Trying to speak up for what's a priority in terms of representing them well was an interesting process, and I think in the urban areas especially so, because we do break up the county, we do break up the city, and so trying to decide what was a big priority to emphasize when we talked about our districts was interesting, and we're passionate about the people we represent and trying to make sure we're doing that well. Going through this whole process, I went to many of the public meetings and online meetings to hear the public input. It's a difficult system and a difficult process because there's give and take and compromise, and when some communities get their priorities met in terms of what they think their voice needs to be. There's others that might not feel like that's the case. And I think that weighing out is a fascinating process. It was really amazing to have the public map submission, and I think this is the first time that's happened. And I learned a lot through that process, in part that no matter what priority you put, there are some drawbacks to those maps. And so even a map that emphasizes certain things, there's other challenges that are brought through that process. So to me, it emphasized that no matter how we approach it, there are going to be challenges in representing people well. We work with the system that's in place. I know one thing I thought was really important being an Oklahoma City Metro person was our population's grown so much, and I'm really glad that the new map represents that in terms of representation. Having a new urban seat, I think, is really important when you look at where the population has grown. So I thought that was a good decision, and I'm pleased with that.
You don't have to walk nearly as far.
My district went from the largest perimeter to the smallest perimeter, so yeah.
So questions?
Back on redistricting, do you think it was appropriate that the maps were drawn and consideration was given to where you all live and to where every lawmaker lives?
Well, I think there's a lot of considerations you have to take, that you look at when you're drawing the maps. I personally wasn't, I mean, the way my map was drawn, the first thing I looked at was not where I lived, because I guess it seems rare. I mean, the last cycle when they did the maps, I think there was only one legislator, or maybe it was 2 cycles ago when one or 2 legislators were drawn out. So I don't know if that was ever, sorry, I'm not sure that was ever something that we were too terribly concerned about. At least I wasn't. I think that there were so many considerations, so many balls in the air about what you look at when you're doing this. The thing that I have to remind people is, and not necessarily you all, because I know that you keep up with these things, but you take one district and it doesn't matter where in the state you start, and the minute you change that district, it changes the entire state. And I don't think I understood the gravity of that kind of action when we first started this process. I think I started out like a lot of lay people do. It's just a puzzle, and we just had to figure out the way the pieces fit. And what I didn't realize was for every piece you put in, it changes every piece around it. So, do either one of you mind?
I mean, really throughout this process, getting an understanding that, you know, is it to the advantage of constituents to lose their representation? You know, so in some cases, you know, I'm sure they may not have a connection with their legislator, but if a community or community group or, you know, individuals have built a relationship with their legislators, is it good for them if it's changed by these redrawing of maps? I don't know. Clearly we had to change some things, but I guess I got more understanding of why keeping an incumbent in place has a value, and I don't see a downside to it. I understand, you know, for folks outside the building, maybe those relationships with the community wouldn't be as impactful, but I think people are, if they trust us, if we trust each other, we're able to work together more, we're able to listen more, and we're really trying to represent people well. So I think those long-term relationships have some value.
I wanted to ask about, there has been a lot of concern nationally, definitely on gerrymandering, and so is that something that came up at all for you all, or something that was a concern, and do you feel like the process has been as politically fair as it could be with lawmakers drawing their own political boundaries?
Well, I'll let Senator Kirt and Senator Brooks speak to what kind of discussions were going on in their meetings, and as they were actually looking at the maps and how things were coming together. But I can tell you that, I mean, honestly, yes, of course, gerrymandering was a discussion that we had. It was a discussion we had from the standpoint of concern. I mean, it's when you're talking about the process, it's like a football game. You're going to talk about your offense and your defense, not necessarily because you're worried about one or the other, but you've got to look at the big game. And gerrymandering has been an issue. Looking at independent redistricting commissions, of course, everybody's very much aware that was a very, very big discussion we've had for the year before we actually got to this point. So it was something that we were looking at, something of concern. And as I say, I haven't had a chance to look at the complete state maps yet or not, but I can't discuss what the internal discussions were within there. But I know from where I sit, Was it an issue? On its face, I can't tell until I look at the maps, but it was something we were concerned about. I don't know if that concern was justified yet. I really don't.
Okay. So one of the things that I think is probably most important to remember is that I believe that Oklahoma was the first to be able to come out with their maps publicly. And so as a result, you know, for national media sources that are interested in redistricting, we're going to be the first group that they can kind of take a look at, criticize, or begin to consider. And so I think that if you look at the shapes of the districts now under the new maps, if you look at the compactness, all of those things, to my knowledge, have been improved. It's one of those things that there are several different priorities that can be considered with a map, and so I don't know if there is a perfect way to be able to make the perfect map. It just depends on how you value each of those priorities. And so I think that what we've been able to come up with is balanced. And I think definitely just looking at my district and how long it is, you see fewer kind of, you know, fingers that dip into the middle of a metropolitan area and then reach out into rural areas. You see fewer little smokestacks. You see fewer kind of irregularities that make you wonder why it was drawn that way. And so the shapes, while they're not perfectly round or perfectly square, I think they're more regular. And I think typically they're more that we use better landmarks, whether it be a major street or whether it be a river or whether it be a county line or something like that. That I think that there was focus and attention in being able to do that as well.
I don't know if they want more on this, but I don't know if you want more on this topic, but you know, we spent a lot of time in preparation for this, learning about the law, you know, trying to understand nationally what the law is, and NCSL did a really great overview of the law. And you know, really gerrymandering hasn't been defined except when it comes to ethnic minority voices, making sure that historically oppressed communities have a voice in our process. And you know, the ethnic minority districts in our state were treated fairly. I think that was a top priority for sure. Other aspects of what has been defined as gerrymandering don't have a clear standard, you know, and I think that's something that we struggled with in terms of, well, what is fair when you're talking about a win-lose political environment, and is competitive fair? Well, the population's changed in Oklahoma, so I think it's really difficult to define fairness or gerrymandering in that case. We know when it comes to communities and when it comes to ethnic minority districts, there's real clear standards for that.
Can I ask?
I'm sorry, Tracy tried twice to jump in.
No, I was going to change topic. I was going to ask a really quick question.
What do you think the appetite is for a plan challenging the governor's consent here proposal?
The Senate, or the House obviously passed one that's moved to the Senate.
It remains to be seen. I mean, and I'm not being coy. This week and last week, as you all know, this is a crazy time. Bills are flying. We track what's going on in the House to a certain extent, but our business focus was to get our bills off the floor and do that as efficiently and as effectively as possible. I was surprised by the vote. It was a lot larger than I thought it was going to be. I know that Representative McIntyre worked it very, very hard, and so it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about the budget and your understanding on some of those negotiations. I know that you have limited ability to be in the room or your designee. There seems to be disagreement between the House and the Senate on the education funding increase number, whether the House wants to trigger the 1017 class size caps. Does your caucus have a preference? The Senate GOP caucus seems to have concern that with the reform going away from the 2-year look back, that this could be a double whammy for rural schools. I know your caucus is predominantly urban, so do you have a preference on triggering that class size cap or not?
So we are predominantly urban, but if you watch us on the floor, if you listen to us in committee, and if you see our votes, you know that the educators in my caucus, and we have quite a few who've been involved in education, keep us focused on a statewide plan. I don't think you can point to very many, if any, votes that we take as a caucus or on the floor that are not, it's not a statewide vote for education. That being said, everything is so fluid until we actually see something that gives us an idea of what the bill says. We've got to see a bill. And the reason I bring that up, it sounds obvious, but we've seen a few very, very large issue bills come through that have appeared after not appearing and being shucked. And we are looking at bills that sometimes we have less than 12 hours, and over on the House side, they've had less than 3 hours to look at. So it's more important to us now than ever that we have something that we can look at and digest, and not just have something given to us and be expected to figure out what's best for the state and for education in the state, and it affects every single person in the state without time to properly research and do that. This is a trigger for me. This is not how we should govern.
Well, and I can't say I would disagree with you, but I think, with all due respect, reality being that once an agreement gets announced between the chambers, that puts you in that position, right? And so I was just kind of curious, now ahead of time, what opinion does the Senate Democratic Caucus have on whether that class size cap statute would be a good thing if it were enacted, or whether this is the wrong year to do it? And so I was just trying to get that information ahead of time before a bill appears and is voted on in 12 hours. So do you have an opinion on that?
Honestly, I want to see what they send us, and then I want the caucus will meet and we'll make a decision. I want input from the rest of my caucus members. So I don't want to speak for the caucus until we have an official position.
I was going to ask, I'm sorry, Justin.
Barbara was trying to ask a question, so I'm just going to read it for her. She was asking, this is back to redistricting. She says, last time with redistricting, it was alleged the maps were drawn in such a way that a middle-of-the-road Republican could not get elected. Is it different this time? And that's from Barbara Holbrook, Tulsa World.
Could you define middle-of-the-road Republican?
I bet if we did, it'd be insulting.
They might get primary.
They might. Do either one of you want that, or do you want me to just give my stock answer? Okay.
Oh man, I should have said JD Dodd.
Well, I mean, the one thing I'll say is political data wasn't in the information that was shared. You know, when we were meeting with the redistricting staff and the redistricting committee, we haven't looked at political data. So first of all, we couldn't speak to that. We haven't analyzed the political data on the maps, although I've seen a lot of national pundits already critiquing it, and I don't know what their assumptions are yet because we were too busy reading bills. But I think that we can't critique 2010 at this point. We can only look at this process now, and it's going to be interesting to see what factors people analyze on our maps and to see what changes. We're getting a lot of extra feedback because of the timing, but we only know what we saw in terms of our communities, so I know that's not a very interesting response. But in terms of, we need to probably ask the political parties what they think about the districts.
The question of constitutionality of legislation has come up. I mean, it came up a lot this week, but it comes up frequently otherwise. And Kirk said that in his time as the leader of the Senate has not knowingly passed unconstitutional legislation. But, I mean, your caucus often argues that some of the things that do come up appear to be unconstitutional. Do you believe that the legislature has passed blatantly unconstitutional legislation, and if so, why is that a problem?
So one of the words in your question that you left out was knowingly, blatantly passed unconstitutional legislation. I have tracked unconstitutional legislation passed in both houses since I got here 9 years ago when I started in the House. And I believe, and I went back 10 years just to see, because I wanted it to be a nonpartisan. I went back to when the Democrats were in control, so I went back that far. And at that point, there were over a dozen, actually over 2 dozen unconstitutional bills, and they were found unconstitutional at anywhere from the state district court level all the way up to a couple in the United States Supreme Court. So I don't think there's any question that the legislature has passed unconstitutional legislation. Did they knowingly pass unconstitutional legislation? I can't answer that. I'd have to speak to every one of the authors. I know that since I've been here, I have raised with certain bills serious concerns I had about the constitutionality of the bills going through. I think that we should look at that issue on the front end. I think if anybody legitimately questions the constitutionality of a bill we're about to pass, I think that we need to get an opinion from either an attorney, a staff attorney, well, not a staff attorney. I think we'd need the Attorney General's office to give us an opinion. And if that's a conflict of interest for the AG, then I think we invest in a constitutional attorney that can give us a straightforward, honest, nonpartisan, non-political answer. It's bad for the state. It costs us money. It costs us reputation. And whatever we tried to accomplish with that bill is not going to be accomplished.
So just to be clear, you're saying that this was a problem before Republicans were in charge of the legislature?
I believe that both Republicans and Democrats have in the past passed unconstitutional legislation, and I can absolutely, and let me be very clear about this, I can absolutely not speak to whether they knew they were doing it at the time. That being said, that doesn't mean we can't learn from that and start being more careful moving forward.
I have one last question. You talked earlier toward the beginning of session, you were concerned about some of the election-related bills that had been introduced, and maybe a lot of them didn't advance, but you know, we see this trend in other states of cracking down on voter access, might be a good way to put it, and it just doesn't seem like the legislature here is doing that so much. Do you still have concerns about some of the voting rights legislation, voting legislation that is advancing?
What was that one we did yesterday?
The state question, automatic recount?
Yeah. We have seen bills like that. Some of the bills have been justified. Some of the bills' justification has not been, I think, enough justification to do what we're trying to do. And the fact that some of the bills that have been run are bills that are being run in various states indicates that it may be more than, it's hard for me to believe that we've got 36 states that all have the exact same problem. Oklahoma is known nationwide for having a very secure voting system. We have machines that are state of the art. We just don't have voter fraud, and we don't have voter machine malfunctions. There was a bill that was run yesterday or day before, they all run together on state question recounts, and when it's going to be automatic, and there just doesn't seem to be a legitimate reason to do it. The bottom line is, this isn't in the weeds, this is just a practical answer. The machines that we have in this state, when there's a state question on the ballot, you've got 2 ballots. I go in and I fill out my general ballot and I put it in that machine, and then I fill out my state question ballot, which is a separate ballot, and I put it in the exact same machine. So if we have to have a recount, it's because someone believes the ballots weren't counted correctly by the machines. Well, if the ballots weren't counted correctly by the machines for the general ballot I just put in, then it messed up with the state question. But that wasn't even addressed. The practicalities of the problems we have, which necessitate a bill which changes and makes mandatory recounts on state questions, we just didn't have an explanation for it. We heard a lot of talk, but there wasn't a valid explanation for it. And the second point on that is, why just state questions? Why is that our only concern? Why don't we have automatic recounts for the other statewide election, that's the governor? Or 2 years from that, the other statewide election, that's the president? I mean, if we're concerned about that, then we need to be consistent and apply it to all situations. And we just didn't get answers to those questions. Anything else? Thank you all so much.